Hey, Prime members! Are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hello and welcome to episode 253 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, the petro province of Alberta, Canada, has long embraced the myth that they will sell their dirty, filthy oil forever. But recently, several U.S. refineries have rattled this tightly held belief, saying they could turn their backs on Alberta in a heartbeat and change up their plants to refine lighter American crude. Looks like Alberta's government just found out that forever lasts for about as long as a duck on a tailings pond.
Korea has the third largest pension fund in the world, and they are divesting from coal. In other Korea news, I will personally be divesting from Squid Game. I really didn't like the second
It was
season.
tough. It really was tough. And it's only part one, and my daughter wants me to watch part two now, and it's like a commitment. I didn't realize I was signing up for 2 seasons when I watched the first. It's a long story. An 8-year-old climate activist in India has pushed its highest court into action. However, the court was split on whether the kid could, stay up past 9 on weekends.
Brazil is looking to counter deforestation with reforestation. They tore down paradise and put up a parking lot. Now they want to tear down the parking lot and put up a paradise. Can't we have both? I love adequate parking.
All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And hello, everyone from war-torn Canada, where we are in the midst of a horrible trade war. You can hear the bombs bursting in the background on our terrorist bombing, We'll probably have to move to the podcast bunker there where you are, Brian, because just for protection from tariffs.
I am secure in my fallout shelter. All right, I wanted to follow up on something we talked about on the podcast a very long time ago. Do you remember when we were talking about deep water cooling in Toronto?
I do. I remember it well.
Yeah. I like to visit Toronto occasionally. You and I both lived there at one time.
Yes.
Anyway, there's sort of an update. It's not late breaking news or anything. It's just, I just found out about this now. So I thought it was a fun sort of update to what we talked about before. So in Toronto, there's a company called Enwave, and they use deep water cooling. So Toronto's right by Lake Ontario. And it turns out if you get deep enough into one of the Great Lakes, the water at the bottom is basically a constant temperature of about 4 degrees Celsius or just above freezing. And so they're sucking the water out of Lake Ontario and they're cooling buildings in downtown Toronto with this water. Anyway, it turns out they've been, sort of upgrading and expanding and doing more things. I didn't realize this. They're now heating and cooling 100 buildings in Toronto.
What was it before?
I'm not sure. It was like a handful of towers, I think, when we first started talking about it.
Yeah, that's a lot, 100 buildings, unless... and especially how difficult it would be to run the plumbing everywhere, I assume.
Yeah, there's a map on their website of where it's running to. So it seems a little bit different than other district heating systems like that we've talked about before in European countries. It'll tend to be like one neighborhood or one town or something like this. These pipes seem to go in kind of different places around Toronto. But anyway, the thing I just found out about is called The Well. And this is a big sort of shopping and office complex in Toronto that I had heard of. I've known about this. It's been open for a year or two, and there's, supposed to be nice shopping there, and there's office space, and there's residential. It's a pretty big complex of several buildings. Anyway, it's called The Well because they built a giant well underneath it, like a giant tank, really.
Okay.
And they're using it for thermal storage, which is another thing we've been talking about more often on the podcast lately. There was that town in Sweden. They're filling up their abandoned caves under the city with hot water, to do some heating in the winter. Anyway, so it's the size of 3 Olympic swimming pools, which didn't sound that big to me. I mean, I know that's a big pool, but it's a giant water tank, and they basically fill it up with cold water in the summer to help with cooling, and then they fill it up with hot water in the winter to help with heating. And the ability to use it as a battery, a thermal storage battery, they say really evens out the cost of this and makes the heating and cooling, makes the heating on par with natural gas in terms of the cost, because they can heat the water with electricity when the prices are low and then discharge it during peak times. And The same thing with cooling. And apparently they do sometimes run out of cold water from Lake Ontario in the system. So if they ever have to, they use electricity to cool the water. And again, they do that when the electricity is cheap. They fill up this big tank underneath the well. And it's quite an ingenious system they got going there.
You know, what also makes me think about is 4 degrees Celsius, you could pull geothermal from that. You like a ground source heat pump would pull from the ground.
Yeah.
Which is something like that, 4 degrees or something like that all the time?
That sounds a bit low. I think it might
That
be
sounds low,
generally higher
it
than
is
that,
low. But you could it's warmer than the outdoor winter air. So you could, pull easier to use a heat pump to transfer energy from 4-degree water than it would be from, say, -10 weather outside.
Yeah,
so that seems like there's an interesting prospect there.
But yeah, and it's not just cooling, it's heating and cooling, and they're doing it all through this district system, which apparently has been working really well.
Did you look that closely at the map of 100 buildings? Are they all large towers, or are there some small, older buildings in there? I'm wondering if it's just everything in an area or if they've selected certain buildings.
Yeah, well, again, it's on their website, or this one is thewelltoronto.com, and it just sort of explains how this all works. But no, the buildings are not all together. They're kind of spread out, and it's a network of pipes that just goes to, I guess, whatever buildings they have contracts with to actually do this.
And they must have had some government help from that as well. So my daughter calls me the other day in the middle of a school day, and then she says, I'm going to put my teacher on the line. So I'm thinking, okay.
Flashbacks to, James, you thought you were in trouble with the teacher.
Yeah. Well, she said this was the teacher who drives the Hyundai Ioniq 6. And I was behind him in a Tim Hortons drive-through line once, and I always drop my daughter off to school 3 days a week. So I see that car. I envy the car. It's not my ideal car, but it's better than what I have. So I envy it, and it's a
really nice electric car.
And yeah, his broke down. So she phoned me as if I had the answers. The host of the Clean Energy Show, the non-electrical engineer, non-automotive engineer, the regular guy that I am. But she was impressed with what I spat out. I did some quick research, and he was aware that there was some recalls. I think what had happened is that the cooling fluid, there's a cooling fluid loop to the motor, and it broke and leaked on something, an ICCU unit, and its fuse, which is what has been being recalled. And when that happens, the 12-volt battery goes down. Now, you might think the 12-volt battery is not important, but without that, your car would stop running if you think about it, if it just completely went dead. So that's a dangerous situation, which is why there's recall. Yeah,
electric cars still have a traditional 12-volt battery, much like regular cars do, because that's just how usually the interior systems of the car will work.
Yeah, the computer system and the battery management system, everything's being controlled from that, not the 400 or 800 volts, 800 in this case, from the battery, or from the the traction battery that moves the car, the big one. There's 2 different batteries. I felt terrible for him. I feel like this is the guy that I criticized for not going to British Columbia last summer. He turned around in Moose Jaw an hour away and came back and got his combustion vehicle because he got
worried,
nervous about chargers.
Yeah.
And I think Hyundai's on the supercharger access now, right?
Yeah.
So I've got my thing, and I'm starting to look at my trip to the West Coast this summer because my kids out there have got a free lodging. So I figure I have to take advantage of free lodging and spend a couple $100 in electricity or something to get there. And yeah, the Tesla network is making a difference. I can tell now that there are places that there's actually quite a few new Tesla charging networks showing up between here and, say, the British Columbia border.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There's one or two, they make a difference. So, and then there's one that I didn't realize was there in a town that didn't have, there's a couple places that didn't have much or any non-Tesla chargers. So, that helps because that's a charging desert out there. So that's actually a place that is probably going to pay for my, if nothing else, it's peace of mind, but it'll pay for my adapter that I spent a couple $100 on to adapt my non-Tesla car to the Tesla charging network. And it is more expensive, so I would avoid Tesla when possible, but it's also convenient because they're always there. And there's like I say, there's a lot of places that I go to that have 2 chargers. So do you want to take a chance that 2 chargers are full, or do you want to go to a Tesla with 8 and hope that they're not think that there's a better chance. So, and I'll try and avoid a long weekend this year.
And something we didn't mention, and I haven't been to a Tesla charging station recently, but they've adopted a waiting queue system. This was reported a couple of weeks ago, where if you get to a Tesla charger and it's full, you're going to get messages in your display about who's actually next, because they can tell who was there first. Because, I had that problem when I was in Calgary, because they only had one charger there, and it was super busy. And people were coming in from both ends and sort of waiting there for a free charger. And then, well, how do you know who was there first? But now there's some sort of internal car kind of line system.
Well, I'm looking forward to that trip, but I'm a little disappointed in Hyundai and Kia for putting out these cars that apparently a lot of the Hyundai Ioniq 5s are needing work too. And I wasn't sure, but I said my friend, his car is working well, because as far as I know it is.
Yeah.
So that gave him some reassurance. And I said, first model year issues are going to be a thing. So he's kind of jumped on one of the earlier ones that came out, the Ioniq 6.
No,
but it makes everybody look bad, Brian. It makes, his neighbors are going to say, aha, he's driving a loaner because it's a long time to get the parts too.
Yeah.
And, then you lose confidence in your car, and you wonder, well, is it going to break down if I take it on a trip? And I empathize with that. And it's not what we need. We need to get these cars right before, even if they are first year, get them right.
And of course, we've reported on other problems before, like the Chevy Bolts, like they had to have their batteries recalled. That was a huge deal. But overall, given, the massive switch in technology from gas to electric, the number of problems, it hasn't been too bad, I think, overall. But, when you get stuck with a problem like that, it certainly doesn't feel like that.
So a lot of these Kia and Hyundai cars, the dealers will inspect and replace the ICCU and its fuse as necessary. In addition, dealers will update the software for it, and all repairs are performed free of charge. But, it's just sad, and I wish it doesn't happen. And I feel, I was put on the, the advocate of EVs was put on the spot. He loves the car, he says, but it's 2 or 3 month wait for the parts. So he has a loaner from the dealer that is a combustion car, I believe. Hey, Saul Griffith, I like him. He's an advocate for clean energy. He's also an engineer and a startup guy. He's started up many different things, including founding Rewiring America and Rewiring Australia, where he's back now in Australia after, I think, about 20 years in Silicon Valley, where he started up all kinds of companies. These are nonpartisan organizations dedicated to electrification and decarbonization. That's important to note that they are nonpartisan, because they try to make everybody happy on all sides of the spectrum when it comes to government policy and the associated policy and regulatory implications of meeting our climate goals. He was on the Fully Charged podcast, and I enjoyed hearing him talk. I always enjoy hearing him talk, so here's a clip.
I don't really believe the American stories of the enormous subsidies of the Chinese government. I think the Chinese government is not subsidizing those industries to any greater degree than the American government is subsidizing the oil and gas industry. So let's just call that a square. China does not have enough domestic oil or gas to run its economy. It doesn't really want to buy it from Russia or Saudi Arabia or America. They're all bad options if you're China. Yeah. So it said, we'll go all electric.
That is something I thought about before. It's sometimes hard to quantify the actual subsidies we put in, but we also subsidize the auto industry here in some respects.
Yeah, so many things are subsidized.
But certainly oil and gas is subsidized in, I think trillions of dollars worldwide every year, or 1 trillion anyway. He also went on to mention combines, which is something I've brought up on the show when we're trying to think about what is not going to be able to be electrified. Well, we think of long-haul jet flights, and we think of combines is something that I thought, because we live in, wheat country here in Canada on the prairies.
Yeah.
And we see combines working 24 hours a day. They'll go strong because when the time is right, then you have to worry about frost. You have to worry about rain.
Yeah.
So when the time is right, you go around the clock.
It's a weird case where they do have to run like crazy to get the crop off.
So you can't, stop and charge it for 5 hours. A big combine would have to run for a long time. Yeah. He says that you could probably get a bunch of littler combines, like a bunch of smaller combines like drones.
Yeah.
In the future, it's going to be probably a completely automated operation. I don't think that's far-fetched at all.
No, and we know already that there is some farm machinery that runs by GPS, right? That is already kind of semi-automated. So yeah, actually...
The solar storm was actually affecting those systems last spring and May when we were my daughter and I were taking pictures of the Borealis. So yeah, that precise GPS stuff was not working well, and then you couldn't do your crops very well. And okay, so Rob Ford, that's the Premier of Canada's Ontario province, where all the auto manufacturing is. He's, Canada's facing an existential crisis with this tariff war, but Ontario is particularly vulnerable because there's a lot of jobs in and around automotive, and they're all good jobs. It's the oil industry in Ontario, essentially. We worry about, our governments worry about oil jobs here in Saskatchewan and Alberta, where all the oil is. But it's kind of the same thing. Not as much money goes to automotive workers, but it's a good income. They have retirement plans, and it means a lot to the economy. And Trump is trying to shut that down. So Rob Ford, as we mentioned last week, the premier of that province, has said that he was going to put tariffs on the electricity that he sends to, I think, 1.5 million people in 3 states like Michigan and around there. And he actually did it. He went ahead and did the 25%. Of course, that pissed off their orange president, and he's freaking out this morning, saying that they're going to double the aluminum's tariffs, and they get most of their aluminum from Canada. So good luck buying anything that has metal in it without paying a lot of money. And it's getting ugly. I mean, some people argue don't. Trump is not going to lose. He's going to just, he'll invade us before he loses a tariff war. Like he's just, doesn't want to lose, obviously, unless we drag this out until he's replaced. But yeah, Rob Ford is threatened cutting off electricity. And Brian, I think he might do it. I don't think this is necessarily a good cop, bad cop, where the prime minister, we have a new prime minister, by the way, is, he's just there to be the bad person. I think he seems to be doing things that he's pissed off. And I think he could cut off the electricity. It was joked around here that he could cut it off during the Super Bowl, and that would really have an impact last year. But I think there are huge implications to just cutting off and disconnecting a grid, like the timing, the alternating current that gets synchronized with Canada and everything. That would cause a lot of damage, and we would be sued for a lot of money. So he would have to give notice.
Well, yeah, I mean, there could be loss of life even if it was done, too abruptly. And
yeah, what was that series I was watching that wasn't very good that had Robert De Niro in it on Netflix? I watched the whole thing. It had like 53%. It was terrorists had turned off the electricity for, was it a minute or an hour? It wasn't very long, but they completely shut everything down, and people were crashing on trains and things. And I think 3,500 or 6,500 people died in America. And then, there was political instability, and that was kind of the point, not to spoil it. But yeah, the terrorists were trying to reset America. They were homegrown. There, I spoiled it for you, but it's not a very good series. So, but I stuck with it. Well, I don't usually stick with things, but yeah, I stuck with it.
The only spoiler for Squid Game Season 2 is that there's a Season 3, and I didn't know that when I was
I would have liked to have had that information going in, thank you very much, and I did not.
A lot of people were annoyed with Wicked for the same reason. They weren't labeling it. They weren't labeling it as Wicked Part 1, so you get to the end, it's like, oh, we got to watch a whole other damn movie.
All right.
Okay, so the Korea Pension Fund, this is the third largest pension fund in the world. It's worth about $800 billion US, and it's a good news, bad news story. The good news is that they are divesting from coal. The bad news is they're probably doing it slower than they should, and they've been kind of, dithering about this for years. And we've had similar announcements. It sounds like everybody's moving a little too slowly on this. Norway has a giant pension fund, and they're starting to divest, and Japan as well. But it says overall 5% of this fund is in energy. And I don't know, it just strikes me that there's got to be other things to invest in. Like it's they're hanging on to coal like it's somehow the only thing you can invest in. Like, just get out of it now.
Why would anyone invest in coal? Yeah, I don't know why. It seems like that if they get 50% of their 3-year average revenue from coal power plant or production, that the ministry said they would divest from it. Is that right?
Yeah. So they're just sort of analyzing each company, and if it gets more than 50% of its revenue, they're out. Korea does have a plan to decarbonize by around 2050. So again, it's I think like a lot of things we cover on the show, it's all moving in the right direction. but people have to step up and just move it faster.
Well, this is one of those things. These pension funds and investor sort of activism does make a difference, but this has sort of been rolling back since the U.S. election. Banks are now saying we're not going to worry so much about, climate stuff anymore. They've all come together and said, because they're such heroes, those banks. They're such brave, bold heroes for saving the world. And, well, screw them.
But again, and it's not like it's a good investment anyway. I mean, why would you invest in something that it's on its last legs? So, whatever changes politically, it's still a bad investment.
So this story that I have now is a bit under the radar and a bit unusual for us, but I want to talk about it because I thought it was very significant. Being that we live here and we listen to the politics all the time drives us crazy. The whole idea of, Alberta, the oil capital of Canada, saying that, India will never drive electric vehicles. They're not going to drive Teslas. Well, they will drive Chinese vehicles that start at $10,000 or even less, or their own homegrown vehicles from Tata Motors that are starting for less. They're 2- and 3-wheel transportation. Electrifying is easy. There's all kinds of things that they think that the oil is going to last forever. We know, people, listeners know. No, not really.
No, and like we just talked about, China's electrifying for very practical reasons because they don't want to have to, import their oil from a list of, places they don't want to deal with.
Yeah, if you don't have oil, you're going to electrify faster. And that's what we're finding. African countries, developing nations. We talked about Pakistan recently. So tariffs are likely to crater the Canadian crude exports to the U.S. Marathon tells investors. U.S. refinery giant Marathon Petroleum Company has unequivocally told investors they plan to abandon their longtime Alberta oil patch suppliers now that President Donald Trump has implemented a 10% tariff on Canadian energy imports. And, I'm not ruling out the federal government increasing that because that's a weakness. If you send up gas prices, that's not really going to affect you. That 10%, they say, is going to be absorbed by the oil companies and a little bit by the refineries and a little bit by the consumer. So it's not going to be a shock to the consumer. So I wouldn't be surprised if this tariff war continues to escalate that, and the oil provinces won't like that because they have literally the oil company's hand up their butts. They're not on strings like a puppet. They're the other kind of puppet where the hand goes right inside. That's my view of it. So Alberta has long held close to the myth that Alberta oil will sell forever and demand will stay good for decades to come. And they're starting to get, messages from China as demand is plateauing there because of electrification, and that's really going to increase. I've got stories later in the show about how quickly that is going to change. So in a Q4 earnings call to shareholders, U.S. refinery giant Marathon Petroleum unequivocally told the investors that this is going to happen. Each oil refinery generally is set up to only refine certain types of oil. I have a refinery a couple kilometers away, maybe not even a couple kilometers away. It refines a certain kind of oil. It can't refine other kinds of oil. It's a heavy oil upgrader. And it costs maybe as much as billions of dollars to upgrade these plants to do something else. So people assumed that was not going to happen because they have to change everything in the plant, different oil. I mean, I don't think people realize how many different kinds of oil there are, but there are all kinds of different kinds of oil.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's heavy crude and light crude. That's about all I know.
Well, they've got weird names to them, too, and some of them include the name sour, which is appropriate. Each oil refinery is generally set up to refine certain oils, and in the Midwest United States, they take our heavy oil and upgrade it and sell it as gasoline there. And that's where a lot of our oil goes to, and the rest goes down to the Gulf Coast. So, unlike electrons, Brian, oil comes in many different varieties, and you have to build a multi-billion-dollar refinery around refining each type. Here's a quote from the story. "We could look to pivot to alternative crudes because of our logistics capabilities," said Rick Heslane, Chief Commercial Officer at Marathon. He assured investors asking about the company's tariff exposure to the Canadian heavy oil. I would give you crudes to think of such as Bakken, Rockies, Utica, Marcellus, which that's one I haven't heard of before, as a few that we could switch to. So those are all different kinds of oils, Brian.
Well,
Bakken, which comes from around here in North Dakota, right?
yeah, the Bakken is, where we live. Yeah, here in North Dakota.
Here in North Dakota? We're not North Dakota. You just said here in North Dakota.
Here and North Dakota.
Okay, here and. I didn't hear the and part.
Although I am going there next week, so
okay, look out, North Dakota. Brian's coming. You know what happened to Wisconsin, so just be careful. Rockies, Utica, Marcellus. We do believe the producer will bear a large part of the impact. So I would say a light switch, a switch from heavy to light within our system, we believe would have minimal impact. And that is something that the Canadian oil evil people have not thought could possibly happen. Yes, they thought that they would not have their backs turned on them.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that, the oil from Alberta is oil sands oil, which is very energy intensive to produce. It's the most expensive oil to produce. So, naturally, it's going to be susceptible to any slight increase. So we sort of expected them to have problems eventually anyway, just because of the cost. But, sure, a little 10% is enough to knock it over the edge of being not profitable.
It's actually fairly significant to the Alberta economy. Canada produces about 5 million barrels of crude per day, 80% of which is delivered to refineries in the United States. Marathon is the biggest of those American processors, handling 2.5 million barrels per day. Almost half of Marathon's capacity is located in the U.S. Midwest, which is the largest U.S. export region for Canadian crude. Now, this story was from DeSmog. And they write, the biggest U.S. and Reuters, I should point out. Reuters had the original story. DeSmog picked up on it and added some context and commentary. The biggest U.S. buyers of oil sands crude will have revealed how quickly the Albertan economy will be thrown under the bus if their short-term profitability pointed elsewhere. This truth bomb lay waste to a cherished narrative within the Alberta oil patch that their global market position is secure for decades into the future. Premier Daniel Smith has regularly boasted there is room to double provincial production, which I'm sure she would love to do. They have no sales tax there. They've never had sales tax in my lifetime. And, that's because they're rich with crude.
Yes, Texas tea, as they say.
Yes, if you read the Beverly Hillbillies, which you're not.
Yeah, so that figure surprises me. 80% is exported to the U.S. I wouldn't have realized that it was that high. And of course, there's a big movement now, buy Canadian here in Canada. Everybody wants to avoid the tariffs by doing more business in Canada, but nobody can flip a switch and do something different with 80% of what's coming out of those oil sands. So this is going to be a very difficult problem.
And remember, the United States is producing a lot more oil due to fracking technology than they used to, and they're self-sufficient, essentially.
Yeah, going back to the energy crisis from the 70s when, they realized that they had to produce more of their own oil to be less dependent on foreign nations, which we were just talking about.
But such a switch would not happen overnight. When a refinery goes down, oil prices go up. Because, there's been storms and things that have knocked out refineries and gas prices have gone up. And gas prices, of course, people are not, they're wary of inflation. So when gas goes up, then the masses get uneasy politically. There's unrest. Everyone, I'd like you to contact us by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Hey, congrats to Derek Green, who won a 1-year membership in our Patreon Clean Club last week. I informed him of his win, and he wrote back, "That is awesome. Thanks very much, and thanks for continuing the great show." And thanks for listening, Derek. Derek got access to our library of bonus podcasts, including last week's Patreon episode, where we discussed the crater that killed the dinosaurs and how the oil industry kept it quiet, the discovery of the crater, for a whole decade. And that was pretty significant in the grand scheme of the advancement of science. Crypto mining buys coal plants, and sustainable Tim Hortons and EV Chargers, a local entrepreneur. We have to go there because that's in our town. The chargers are active now. They got these new chargers that are active from Flow, these new generation chargers. So I'd like to give that a try. If we do have coffee there sometime, I want you to try charging my car, because you have to use CCS1 before it's gone so that you can tell your great-grandchildren about it. And we also talked about a blimp causing a power outage in Texas from a rogue U.S. Customs surveillance blimp, and heat pump home tours in the UK. and Toyota's $15,000 EV only in China. Support the podcast today by going to patreon.com/cleanenergyshow. You can sign up for a free Patreon account and follow us, or you can donate as little as $1 a month. And if you really want to support the show, you can get into one of our clean clubs, and you'll get free podcasts that we make just for our Patreon Clean Club members. And thanks to Jeff, who gave us a kind donation on PayPal and wrote that he has moved from a Tesla to a Hyundai Ioniq 6 lease.
I hear there's a recall.
Just be careful, Jeff, and make sure you get your recalls done quickly. He says partly because he was worried about the resale value of the Tesla. There's a lot of anti-Tesla sentiment out there right now in the news anyway. We'd love to hear from our listeners, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And you can also leave us a voicemail online at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow, just like Ali did this week.
Hi, my name is Ali. I've been a long-time listener, and I started a YouTube channel called Clean Titans, talking to visionaries and innovators who are helping to clean up our future. I would love to get your feedback and suggestions on people I should interview. Thanks. Again, the channel is Clean Titans.
Thank you, Ellie, for leaving us a voicemail, and thank you for jumping on the clean energy bandwagon and making content. But I'd have to say you're barking up the wrong tree, because Brian and I are not prolific YouTubers. we have a small presence on YouTube, I would say.
Yeah. I have a bigger presence with my Star Trek bloopers that I just posted on my YouTube channel.
So
it's a long story, but
and now it's going to go even higher, because, the Clean Energy Show listeners will go look for that.
But yeah, my brother had a Super 8 reel of Star Trek bloopers that he bought back in the 80s, and I digitized it and put it on my YouTube channel. 3,300 views so far, and it's climbing every day. People love
What format was it on?
What do you mean? Like
when your brother,
it
was Super 8, right?
Yeah. With sound, I had a Super 8 sound projector at the time,
uh-huh.
and you could watch this thing. So yeah, it's climbing every day. Is
it 4K?
Yeah, I did a 4K scan of it.
Oh man, that's hilarious.
It doesn't look that great, because it would have been originally 35 millimeter, reduced to either maybe 16, and then reduced to Super 8, and it's got scratches in it and everything. But it's the best quality of these old Star Trek bloopers that you can find on YouTube. But yeah, I think most people listen to us on Spotify, on podcasts. The YouTube videos don't get that many views, but we do it anyway because it's free. I guess.
Brings in people. I guess it's the idea that we do it is to bring in people to the audio podcast.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of people do it. We like concentrating on the audio podcast because videos are a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of work. And the audio podcast fills up a great deal of my time. I looked at your thumbnails. They look okay. I'm not a thumbnail expert. If I was, I wouldn't have the low number of views I have on YouTube. But I would say just, if you're passionate about it, keep doing it. And as long as you're happy and you post on a regular basis, I think that's really all you need to do.
Yeah, I think you just have to enjoy doing it, because the chances are you're not going to really get much traction for at least a couple of years. There's a lot of these kind of jobs now where if you just stick at it and you're able to do it for free for a couple of years and you do a decent job of it, eventually it catches on and people listen. But it's also really hard work. So you really have to keep probably reevaluating it as well. Is this worth my time? Do I want to do another year or two without huge views or whatever? Well, then, other people know how to do it better than us, and, they get millions of views right away. So who knows?
Yeah. And you can watch YouTube videos, and there's a lot of places where you can go to get tips. And I've done that. But honestly, I just don't have the passion to do it. We do put our video podcast on other platforms, and it's basically just because that's a thing now. I guess people like watching it. More people are watching YouTube on their televisions, their smart TVs now than are on laptops and phones now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I was listening to the Lipson podcast a little bit before the show, and there's some changes going on there with their stats. So, but you could also listen to our podcast on YouTube, and somebody is right now. There are, I don't know, maybe 100 people on a couple different channels listening to just the audio of us on YouTube. And hello to you guys. I don't know who you are, but thanks for listening.
Okay, so moving on to news about COP30. This is the International Climate Summit that we talk about every year. So the next one is going to be in Brazil. It's going to happen at the end of this year around November. And the chairman from Brazil is advocating for more global support and investment for reforestation. And this is just something we haven't talked about in a long time. I mean, the first problem is deforestation. And we know that, the Amazon rainforest is still shrinking every year. Brazil has made some strides to cut that down, but we need to stop the deforestation and then reforestation. And they're just the chairman is advocating for funding for this because this is often for countries that can't necessarily afford to do this kind of thing. But it's, it won't solve climate change by itself, but, planting trees, as simple as that sounds, does make a difference, especially in places like the rainforest. I'm not sure planting more trees in Canada is going to do much good because it just seems that our forests are burning down every year. But the rainforest is called the rainforest because it's wet and it is far less likely to burn. So, yeah, that's what they're going to talk about. One of the things to talk about at COP30 coming up in Brazil at the end of the year.
Yeah, and the biggest problem with COP right now is the issue of supporting, developing nations, poorer nations, and helping them, the richer nations that have caused all the pollution in the United States and China, and helping them. And of course, the United States has backed away from anything climate. You can't even put the word gay on a plane that dropped a bomb in pictures. It's been scrubbed from websites. So yeah, other people have to step up, and it's going to be a tough 4 years for climate for sure, which is too bad because it's going to cost the United States billions and billions of dollars in storm damage and insurance, and people are going to have a hard time getting insurance at some point. It seems stupid. And of course, there's been a lot of progress in Brazil with slowing down deforestation and, with the change of government there and change of policy, because they will burn to make palm oil. That's an important thing. And we also talked about fake palm oil coming online in a factory, industrial way now. That's good. What I am disappointed about is things like Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat's not doing very well right now. I think they got killed by inflation for a while. It's still $1.50 or $1.75 more to buy an Impossible Whopper than a regular Whopper, which is too bad because I used to see some price parity from time to time. But yeah, it just happens that way. They need to improve their aftertaste and things like that. That I think I could get, if they were at price parity, I could probably get used to them in a short amount of time. Depends on how much I ate out and how many burgers I ate. But I'll say this again, the best burger I may have ever had, my wife made during the pandemic when she bought a fresh Impossible Meats. It was or Beyond Meat. It was fresh. It wasn't frozen. She brought it home. She cooked it. It was delicious. Had a fresh bun and everything, and it was really good. And I would prefer that to actual meat because I would so quickly leave the meat bandwagon if I could easily do it.
Well, quality ingredients make all the difference. I mean, just having a nice bun, good quality bun.
Oh, a good bun, Brian, is,
I love a good
that's
bun.
important. And of course, fresh, crisp vegetables and the right onions are good. So in India, an 8-year-old climate activist has changed the world. I don't know how this happens.
What were you doing when you were 8 years old?
I don't even want to say. Probably hiding in a corner of somewhere, protecting myself. Now we're diving into a remarkable legal move in India, Brian, because this 8-year-old activist, this climate activist, how do you become a climate activist at 8? I don't know. I mean, Greta Thunberg was kind of interesting. She was very young when that happened, but 8, come on. What was Greta doing when she was 8?
I just watched Amadeus, and, Mozart wrote a freaking symphony when he was 5 years old or some damn thing. It's crazy.
Screw him, making the rest of us look bad for centuries. So, yeah, she has pushed the highest court into action. So Ridmiha Pandey, a young climate activist, filed a petition raising concerns over carbon emissions and their devastating environmental impact. And in response, the Supreme Court has issued notices to 8 central ministries, including renewable energy, power, urban development, and transport, demanding a unified approach to tackle climate change. They weren't working together, in other words, and now they will pool the resources, their planning, and everything else to make it happen. The court criticized these ministries for working in silos, quote unquote, despite climate change affecting multiple sectors. Two justices called climate change one of the most existential global predicaments, highlighting its effects on public health, agriculture, and economic stability. Rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and increasing energy demands make immediate action essential. The Supreme Court also called for a reassessment of India's environmental laws, including the Environmental Protection Act and the 1981 Air Pollution Control Law. You know, I'm just amazed by this. Like, what happens if a 10-year-old did it too? Like, if an 8-year-old can do it, if the 10-year-olds all got together, is it just that the 8-year-olds care more? What's going on? I don't know.
But getting to the Supreme Court, like I'm assuming the 8-year-old had some help with that.
Well, they had some help getting a lawyer to make the petition, but it was done on that person's behalf. So in a separate case, another bench has ordered all states and union territories to form expert committees to review land classifications after concerns that a 2023 amendment excluded vast areas of forest land from protection. And we're all hoping, Brian, that rules like this will drive more real change in the world. There was kids in Montana, teens and preteens who, won a court case in the Supreme Court there, and they won the review when it was reviewed and appealed. They won that appeal at the Supreme Court level. So it's, they said it was in the Constitution and they've won. So now that's over and good to see. Coming up next, it's the lightning round.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.
Time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Activist Erin Brockovich. You remember her, Brian, from the movie Erin Brockovich. Played by, you remember?
Julia Roberts.
Yes.
Directed by Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah. Is now publicly fighting. She was an activist then against bad things. Now she's publicly fighting for regulatory oversight of the battery storage industry after the Moss Landing fire in California. That's when an energy storage plant with all these sort of containers, these rectangular containers, went up in flames. Like a couple of them overheated and maybe set off the other ones. Now, I would be concerned if I was downwind from that. I don't know what fumes go. And I think that's her concern, is that they aren't talking about it. Her concern is there's too much silence and people need to be forthright. So she's drawing attention to this because, there will be a lot of batteries around. And when there are fires with the current technology, there's more likely fires than future technology we see in the pipeline. Well, that we want to know what's going on. We want to know if we're breathing bad air.
Yeah,
not so much worried about other things like fires, though, right? I mean, it's probably not going to start a forest fire.
Well, I mean, hopefully they're positioned in a place where that's not likely to happen. But we do talk about these battery fires from time to time. There's not a huge number of them, but this is something that will eventually be figured out so it doesn't happen anymore. But for the time being, it's a real concern.
The new second in command at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency made nearly $3.2 million in 2024, representing a range of fossil fuel companies who fought against pollution cases and enforcement actions. So that's a good person to have in charge of the EPA. His clients included Chevron, Sunoco Pipeline, and more. So congratulations there, U.S. government. Premier of Ontario confirms 25% tariffs, and it'll be starting this week on Monday. Montana, a red state, just below us. Hello, Montana, if you can hear me. It is a red state. Not incredibly red as it used to be, Brian. It's actually a little more purple than it used to be, as my son likes to point out. It produced 90.4% of the electricity it consumed in 2024 with just wind, water, and solar. Wind was 35%, 52% hydro, it looks like, and 3% solar, which is not much, but it's still more than 3 times more than what we have, and we have just as good sun or not better.
Yeah, very similar climate and terrain, so we got to do better.
So my son points out, he's a political junkie in the making. He says that a lot of people like your David Lettermans and other people are moving to Montana. Rich people are moving there for the scenery, and they're bringing their liberal views with them.
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah. I think he bought a ranch there many years ago.
Oh, yes. And there's other Hollywood stars who followed suit. Is electricity expensive because of these woke endeavors, Brian? No. It's just 12.7 cents for electricity per kilowatt hour.
In Montana, that's entirely reasonable.
Cheaper than us. That's cheaper than us. And the average is 16 cents across America, which is roughly what we pay, maybe a tinge more than what we pay here. Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom and others are stepping up to back South Africa, Indonesia, and Vietnam's just energy transition partnerships after the U.S. withdrawal. So that was what we were sort of alluding to earlier. Other people are stepping up. China is going to cut energy per unit of GDP by 3% this year. That's pretty good. That's not bad. Yeah. At least they're thinking about it, and they're trying. So over in China as well, the Huawei Atto M8 PHEV is about to come out, and each dealership, PHEV, by the way, is kind of like an electric car with a gas engine backup. But the PHEVs nowadays will do most of your driving for you in a day. It's like 100-kilometer range or sometimes even more.
Yeah, especially in China. They've put really big batteries into their plug-in hybrids.
So you're probably getting, unless you go on trips, you're probably getting an oil change for no reason. Every year, you still have to get that oil change.
And you just got to burn a little bit of gas every once in a while, because gas goes bad. If you don't,
electrons don't go bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're getting 55 to 60 pre-orders per dealership, totaling 50,000. Can you imagine a dealership getting 60 car orders of one car type?
Yeah.
Like that would more than fill a lot of the dealerships around here, parking lots. It would be all one car. That is a huge thing, and people were waiting for that. Huawei is doing a good job with their cars. They are, of course, a gadget manufacturer, a telecommunications company.
Yeah.
They decided to get into cars, and fairly quickly they are making their cars popular. And a lot of the reason is the technology in the cars, and including self-driving.
Yeah, because software is one of the things that the legacy automakers have really struggled with. But if you're a sort of a software gadget company to begin with, then I guess the software is easier.
So in a filed patent, Stellantis, that is the automotive manufacturer, outlines an EV transmission that would employ magnetic viscous fluid, allowing it to shift more efficiently than traditional hydraulic transmissions and automatic transmissions. Now, most EVs, almost all of them, don't have transmissions, which is kind of an advantage. You don't have to worry about that braking. That's kind of a
simpler.
Nice thing. Yeah. There are some people, I think is there a Porsche or some higher end cars that have like a 2-speed transmission. So when you hit the highway, the revving, there's less pressure, less torque, less oomph, but it's more efficient. It rides at a slower speed.
Yeah, and I guess if your EV did have a transmission, it has the potential to be overall more efficient. But I guess up till now, the problem has been it's just not made sense. It's too expensive to put in a transmission. The savings, whatever efficiencies, aren't necessarily worth it. But, perhaps that patent with magnetic viscous fluid, whatever the hell that is, makes it all possible.
Sounds good. Brian, I saw another story about Porsche Taycans. That's the first EV that they released.
Yeah.
Kind of like a small crossover. I think it goes back to 2019. Predates our podcast.
Yes, and I believe those have a 2-speed transmission.
They are selling for $40,000 to $50,000 used in the United States. And I tell you, it makes me want to go get a real job. Because I like the Porsche Taycan. It charges fast. It does everything well. It's nice styling inside and out. And just, it's one of the most successful, well done, properly done EVs out there. And I don't think it's had any, major mechanical issues either. They got that down pretty good too.
Yeah, I just watched the movie Tar with Cate Blanchett from a year or two ago.
Yeah, she drives the
Porsche Taycan in that, which fits her character nicely in that movie.
I mentioned that before on the show. I really think that's one of my favorite performances of an actor of all time. Like it's pretty remarkable.
It's pretty great.
Okay, so in the first week of March, the ERCOT power grid that supplies nearly all of Texas. Texas is famous for having not really connected to the outside world. It's got its own island of a power grid, and it's called ERCOT. That is a acronym. Don't ask me what it stands for, but it's there. It's got a nice ring to it. It supplies nearly all of Texas. It set records for most wind production, most solar production, and greatest battery discharge. And Brian, that is going to have to do it for this week. Thanks for listening to the show. We really appreciate all your support on Patreon, and keep those emails coming, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Where can they follow us on social media?
Social media, it's Clean Energy Pod.
Yeah, thanks for all those Patreon members, including Clean Club Executive members Green Bastard and Brett Rutley. And you guys, all you guys in the Clean Club, as you can sign up, you can get ad-free episodes, exclusive access to our Clean Energy Show Discord server, discounts at our merch store, early access to our episodes before the public, behind-the-scenes material, and private updates. Thank you credits on our video podcast and shout-outs once a month or more on our audio podcast. And we just want to really thank everyone supporting the show. You're making it happen. And thanks to all those who have supported us. We're just single and sometimes reoccurring PayPal donations. Those make a huge difference too. You're not asking for anything in return. You just want to support the show. That means a lot to us. Thank you. We'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.